It is time for a new Africa beyond borders and boundaries. Continental integration must be the primary agenda of this year's African Union Summit out in Addis Ababa in Ethiopia. This weekend, African leaders will gather to Ethiopia for the 37th Summit of the African Union. But what are the fundamental challenges that delegates should prioritize? For this discussion, we've roped in Dr. Chidochase Nyere, International Relations Specialist at the Institute for Pan-African Thoughts and Conversation at the University of Johannesburg. Doctor, a very good evening to you. Thank you so much for your time and welcome. Look, as I started my intro to this interview, I really would like to find out from you, what should be the priorities for the AU? They have endured some criticism recently for their seemingly ineffectiveness in African multifaceted challenges like your coups and your conflicts, just to mention a few.
Good afternoon, Alicia, and good afternoon to the listeners. So the challenges that face the AU demand and require that the AU should unionize and unify. So there is a clarion call for the AU to amalgamate as soon as possible. Now, we continue to see all these challenges as a result of our fragmentation. And we know the fragmentation is really not of African origin. We can go into the politics of that, but what it actually tells us is that we need to amalgamate, we need to unify, and we need to unionize. This is what we are required to do. The situation demands that.
And speaking of amalgamation, Doctor, look, the integration agenda, what significance does it hold as global powers are literally vying for influence over African states?
So if we look at all the conflicts that have besieged the African states, we can look at the Coup Belt, West Africa region, we can look at DRC now. If we look at the conflict, at the center of the conflict are resources. And these resources are what attract our enemies. And for us to be able to discern and decipher who our enemies are, we should look beneath the veneer of these conflicts. So the conflicts always manifest as if these are internal conflicts. However, these conflicts are sponsored. If we identify who is sponsoring or who is enabling the conflicts to continue unabated, we would have done half the job. So identifying who the sponsors of the conflicts are is one thing. But what we need to do after identifying those sponsors, we will realize that most of them are foreign. So these are foreign sponsors. They are foreign to the African soil. And because of the fragmentation that we are, they always pit us one against the other. And because of that, it manifests as if these are internal African issues and internal African conflicts, yet they are being sponsored for an agenda. So the agenda is to continue to have us where we are, where we fight amongst each other, where our resources in the process are being transferred and transported elsewhere, and they tend then to benefit those other foreign players to African countries.
And Doctor, look, speaking of critical resources, then what critical steps, concrete as well as practical, can and must the AU take in order to accelerate the Africa Free Trade Area Agreement, which has largely been an unrealized concept? So
your question cuts deep to the crux of why the AU was formed in the first place. So we can find its antecedents already in 1900. When there was that first Pan-African Congress by the Pan-Africanist movement, by the way. And you will realize that since then, there have been different pundits who have always argued that Africa must unite, Africa must come as one. However, there are differences in terms of how that amalgamation should happen. So there has always been differences from the very beginning. I want to highlight the third Pan-African Congress, where the likes of W.E.B. Du Bois was always saying, let's unite as Africa, but let's do it gradually and let's incorporate everyone who is interested. And you also had the likes of Marcus Garvey who was saying Africa is for Africans, and therefore we should start there. The same debate was to be held again in 1963 when Kwame Nkrumah was saying, let's amalgamate, let's form one union in terms of Africa, where we also found Julius Nyerere saying, let's do it gradually, let's form regional economics communities such as SADC, the East African Community, and so forth. So there is a clear mandate that the AU sits with. It should amalgamate, it should unify. There is always a difference on how we should do that and how gradual the process should be. And this is what our African leaders should be looking at, because if you look at the very idea that brought the Union of Africa or the African Union, we haven't achieved it yet. And now we speak of the 2063 agenda. And we are also realizing that if we do not unify and amalgamate in time, we will also be still speaking about these issues post-2063. So it's really important that African leaders take us seriously in terms of the African citizens and realize this clarion call to unify and unionize.
Doctor, unfortunately, we're out of time. I actually wanted to make reference on the conversations there that have been taking place around, of course, the redrawing of the African map. So unfortunately, we're going to leave it there. Thank you so much for your contribution. That was Dr. Chidochase Nyere, the International Relations Specialist at UJ's Institute for Pan-African Thought as well as Conversation.